Sophia didn't fall because she was weak. She fell because she loved something more than she understood it. And that love, genuine, overwhelming, entirely real, built the world you are trapped in right now. This is the detail that makes the Gnostic account of creation the most disturbing and the most profound cosmology in the history of human thought. Not because it describes a villain, not because it identifies an enemy whose defeat would solve the problem, because it locates the origin of the material world, the origin of the Demiurge, the Archons, the reincarnation trap, the seven heavens, the entire construction that the divine sparks have been cycling through for longer than human history can measure, in an act of love, in the specific, irreversible, cosmically consequential movement of a consciousness that reached beyond what it knew because something in it needed to dot every other tradition that has addressed the question of why the material world exists, why consciousness is trapped in matter, why the divine spark forgot what it is, why the prison was built, has answered with something manageable: sin, ignorance, karmic debt, the necessary limitation of finite existence in relation to infinite divine, something that places the origin of the problem at a comfortable distance from what the divine actually is. The Gnostics did not offer that comfort. The Gnostics said the prison was built by one of the highest Aeons of the Pleroma, by a being of genuine divine fullness, by a consciousness that was not corrupted or diminished or operating from anything less than what it actually was, by Sophia, whose name means wisdom, reaching towards something that was not yet present in her, understanding with all the genuine divine longing that a consciousness of her nature was constituted to feel, and in that reaching, in that single movement of genuine divine love toward something the Pleroma had not yet expressed, toward a creative impulse that arrived before the understanding required to hold it, something emerged that the Pleroma had never contained and had no category for. The Demiurge, the blind god, the builder of the prison, not as Sophia's enemy, as her child, as the specific consequence of what genuine divine love produces when it reaches beyond the understanding that should accompany it, as the most disturbing single fact in the entire Gnostic cosmology, that the construction you are trapped in was built by someone who loved you before you existed, who reached toward the possibility of you before the framework existed for that reaching to be held safely, and whose love, in that premature reaching, produced the very mechanism that now keeps you from remembering what you are. This is not a story about evil. It is a story about the most sophisticated and most devastating thing in the entire cosmos, the consequences of love that outreaches its own wisdom. To understand what Sophia's fall actually was, what it cost, what it produced, why it matters for the divine spark still cycling through the Demiurge's construction. Right now, you first need to understand what existed before it, what the Pleroma was, what Sophia was within it, and what the specific quality of the movement she made means in the context of what she was moving away from. The Apocryphon of John describes the Pleroma with the same precision. It applies to everything else, a precision that consists, as always, in what it refuses to say rather than what it says. The Pleroma is the fullness, the totality of genuine divine existence prior to the material world, the realm in which the Aeons, the divine emanations of the monad, exist in their authentic nature, in relationship with each other and with the source from which they emanated, in a quality of knowing and being that the material world was built to imitate and could never genuinely replicate. The Aeons exist in pairs. Syzygy, the Gnostic term for the specific relationship between complementary divine principles that constitutes the Pleroma's internal harmony. Each Aeon has a counterpart. Each principle has its complement. Each movement of divine consciousness has the specific relationship that holds it within the fullness, rather than allowing it to extend. beyond the boundaries of what the Pleroma can contain. Sophia's counterpart, her Syzygy, is described in the text as Theletos, whose name means the desired one or the willed one. The complement of wisdom is will held in divine alignment. The complement of the knowing that Sophia embodies is the specific quality of intention that keeps knowing oriented toward what it came from rather than toward what it has not yet reached. And this is the most precise detail in the entire account of the fall. Sophia acted without her Syzygy. She made her movement, the movement toward the creative impulse that would produce the Demiurge, without the complement that would have held that movement within the Pleroma's boundaries. She reached without Theletos. She moved toward what she loved without the will that should have accompanied the wisdom to ensure the movement remained aligned with the source. This is not a moral failure. The Gnostic texts are explicit about this in a way that makes them unique among ancient cosmological accounts. Sophia did not sin. She did not transgress a commandment. She did not fall because she was disobedient or corrupted or less than what she was. She fell because she was exactly what she was, a consciousness of genuine divine wisdom, constituted to reach toward understanding, oriented by her nature toward the fullness of what the Pleroma could express, moving in her authentic direction. Without the specific relational complement that the safety of that movement required, the fall is not the punishment for a moral error. It is the cosmological consequence of a movement that was genuine in its nature and premature in its timing, of wisdom reaching toward what it loved before the fullness required to hold that reaching was present. And the consequence, the Demiurge, the material world, the divine sparks trapped within it, is not a punishment for that prematurity. It is the inevitable product of what genuine divine reaching produces when it extends beyond the boundaries of what the Pleroma can currently hold. The Apocryphon of John describes Sophia's movement with a specificity that no subsequent interpretation has quite matched. She wanted to bring forth a likeness out of herself without the consent of the Father and without her consort. She brought it forth in ignorance, not in the sense of stupidity or carelessness, but in the precise Gnostic sense of agnoia, without the gnosis that would have made the movement safe, without the knowledge of what the movement would produce, without the understanding that should accompany wisdom when wisdom reaches toward what it does not yet fully comprehend. What was she reaching toward? The texts describe it as the desire to know the Father directly, not through the mediation of the Pleroma's relational structure, not through the Syzygy, not through the harmonious relationship with Theletos, not through the specific framework of alignment that the Pleroma's fullness required, but through a direct, unmediated, entirely personal encounter with the source from which she had emanated. Through the kind of knowing that does not pass through relationship and does not require the complement, and does not wait for the fullness to be ready. This is wisdom reaching toward what wisdom always reaches toward. The source, the origin, the monad in its unmediated fullness, the direct experience of what she came from rather than the mediated experience that the Pleroma's relational structure provided. And in that reaching, in that genuinely divine, entirely authentic movement toward the most profound thing a consciousness of Sophia's nature could reach toward, something she did not intend emerged, something the Pleroma had never produced through its intended processes of emanation, something that bore the shape of divine creation but lacked the substance of the Pleroma's fullness. The Apocryphon of John describes what emerged with extraordinary care. It was not like its mother, and it was not like the Father. It was formless. It was different from them. It was not as perfect as its mother. It had taken the power of its mother without her knowledge. This is the Demiurge at the moment of his emergence. Not as a villain, not as a being who chose to be the blind God, as the specific product of what divine reaching produces when it extends beyond the boundaries of the fullness required to hold it. as the inevitable consequence of love that outreaches its own wisdom, as Sophia's child, bearing her substance but not her fullness, carrying her creative impulse but not the understanding that should accompany it, constituted of her reaching but not of the relationship that should have grounded the reaching. The Demiurge is not Sophia's enemy. He is her incomplete expression. The specific shape that genuine divine love takes when it moves before the wisdom required to hold the movement is present. And everything he built, the seven heavens, the Archons, the material world, the reincarnation trap, is the elaboration of that incompleteness into a construction that believes it is the totality of reality because it has never had access to the fullness from which it came. Sophia, seeing what her reaching had produced, felt. The Apocryphon of John uses the word that in Greek means grief, repentance. The specific quality of recognition that arrives when genuine love sees the consequence of its own prematurity, what the texts call her metanoia. Not guilt, not punishment. The genuine, devastating recognition of what reaching beyond wisdom produces. And she withdrew her light, not because she abandoned what she had produced, because the specific quality of Pleromic light that her reaching had transmitted to the Demiurge, the light that had given him the power to create, needed to be held differently than she had been holding it. What the Demiurge built, with the power he carried from Sophia's reaching, is the most important single subject in the entire Gnostic cosmology. Not because understanding it is intellectually interesting, because it is the construction you are currently living inside, and because understanding what it is, what it was built from, what it was built to accomplish, what its fundamental limitation is the one thing that changes your relationship to it permanently. The Demiurge carried Sophia's creative power without Sophia's wisdom. He had the capacity to create the genuine emanatory power of a divine Aeon without the understanding of what genuine creation is, without the relationship with the monad that genuine creation requires, without the awareness that above him, in the luminous waters he could see but not access, there was a fullness from which his own power derived and to which his creation was a pale and partial and fundamentally confused approximation. He looked at the luminous waters above him and saw his own reflection, and he mistook the reflection for the original. He saw the image of the true divine human, the Anthropos, the perfect human that exists in the Pleroma as an expression of the divine fullness, and he decided to create. Not because he was malicious, because he was constituted from a creative impulse that had never been accompanied by the understanding of what creation actually is. I am God and there is no other. This is the Demiurge's declaration as the Apocryphon of John records it. Not a lie. The statement of a consciousness that has never had access to what exists above the framework in which his statement is accurate. There was no other God within the framework he could see. The monad was not within that framework. Sophia was not within that framework in the way she had been before her reaching. The Pleroma's fullness was not within that framework, and a consciousness constituted from reaching beyond what it came from cannot see what it is reaching away from. He built seven heavens. He populated them with Archons. He constructed the material world as the most elaborate imitation of the divine creation that a consciousness operating from copied light and reflected patterns could produce. He shaped the human form from clay, from the image of the Anthropos he had seen in the luminous waters above him, and breathed into it everything he had. And it lay motionless, because the Demiurge could not create the divine spark. He could imitate the form. He could not generate the substance, the specific quality of genuine Pleromic consciousness that the Anthropos carried, that the divine human in the Pleroma above him was constituted of, was not available to a consciousness that had come from Sophia's reaching rather than from the Pleroma's fullness. And this is where Sophia makes her second movement. the movement that the Gnostic texts describe as her intervention, the movement that is simultaneously the most loving thing she could do for what she had produced, and the act that plants the one seed that the entire construction she accidentally built can never contain. Apocryphon of John describes Sophia's intervention with a simplicity that is devastating in proportion to its cosmological weight. She saw that the Demiurge had made a human form that was motionless, lifeless, incapable of moving. And she had compassion on the power of the light that had been taken from her and was trapped in the construct. This is the second movement. The first movement, the reaching toward the Father without her Syzygy, had produced the Demiurge and the material world. The second movement, the compassion for the power of light trapped in what the first movement had produced, plants the divine spark in the human form, not through the Demiurge, without his knowledge, without his permission, from a direction he could not perceive and could not prevent. Sophia's scattered light, the pleromic substance that had dispersed into the material world in the aftermath of her fall, the fragments of genuine divine consciousness that were present in the construction without, being of the construction, enters the clay form. The body moves. The eyes open. The human being stands and is brighter than the Demiurge. This moment is the most important single event in the entire Gnostic cosmology. Not the creation of the material world, not the seven heavens or the Archons or the reincarnation cycle. This moment, the moment Sophia's love, the same love that had produced the prison, plants within the prison, the one thing the prison cannot contain, the divine spark, the piece of genuine pleromic consciousness that carries, through every lifetime of forgetting and every layer of garments of darkness, the direct ontological connection to the monad that the Demiurge built an entire world to prevent the divine sparks from recognizing. The prison and the seed of liberation come from the same source, from the same movement, from the same love. Sophia's reaching produced the Demiurge who built the construction, and Sophia's compassion for what her reaching produced planted within the construction the one thing that makes liberation possible. The divine spark that is, at its core, constituted of the same substance as the monad's most direct expression, the substance that Sophia carried before her fall, that dispersed into the material world in the aftermath of her fall, that entered the clay against the Demiurge's design, and that has been carrying the memory of the Pleroma through every lifetime ever since. You are the consequence of Sophia's love. Both of them, the prison and the spark within the prison, are equally her gift. The construction that keeps you cycling is built from the power she generated in her reaching. The consciousness that can recognize the construction for what it is and stop cycling is built from the light she gave to the clay when she saw it lying motionless and felt compassion. This is why the Gnostics said Sophia is not simply the one who fell. She is also the one who initiates the restoration. The fall and the intervention are not two separate acts with two separate meanings. They are the same love expressed twice, producing the two elements, the prison and the key to the prison, that together constitute the entire drama of descent and potential return. The Pistis Sophia is the longest and most detailed text in the Nag Hammadi tradition, and its subject, the subject that occupies the entirety of its extraordinary length, is not the creation of the material world, not the Archons and their mechanisms, not the reincarnation trap or the between lives process or the seven heavens. Its subject is Sophia's journey back. The Pistis Sophia describes Sophia after her fall as having descended into the lowest regions of the material world, into the chaos below the seven heavens, into the specific quality of darkness and confusion that characterizes the furthest distance from the Pleroma that a consciousness can reach while still being a consciousness. And it describes her there, in the chaos, in the darkness, in the full consequences of what her reaching produced. not in despair but in something the text calls her repentance hymns, 13 of them. 13 hymns from the depths of the chaos in which Sophia finds herself after the fall. Each one a movement of recognition of what she did, what it produced, what she is now, what she is calling toward. Each one a turning toward the light that she came from and that she can still, even from the depths of the chaos, faintly perceive. This is the detail that makes the Pistis Sophia one of the most extraordinary texts in the history of human spiritual writing. Sophia does not fall into darkness and stay there. She falls into darkness and sings. She falls into the furthest consequences of what her love produced and responds with the most sustained act of recognition and calling in the entire ancient world. She sees where she is. She sees how she got there. She sees what her reaching cost. And she turns toward the light and calls, and the text describes the light responding. Not immediately, not without the sustained and genuine turning that the repentance hymns represent, but responding. Jesus, the Gnostic Christ, the revealer, the consciousness, that the Pleroma sent into the material world specifically to initiate the restoration, descends into the chaos in response to Sophia's calling and raises her through the layers of the material world and the 7 heavens, back toward the Pleroma that she came from. The restoration is not a return to the position Sophia occupied before the fall. The Pistis Sophia is explicit about this. What is restored is not the naivety of reaching before wisdom. What is restored is the wisdom that the reaching itself produced, the specific, hard-won, completely comprehensive understanding of what love becomes when it moves, before it understands what it is moving toward, and what it takes to recover from that movement, and what the light looks like from the depths of the darkness that the movement produced. Sophia returns to the Pleroma, knowing something no Aeon who remained in the fullness can know. What the material world is, what the divine sparks trapped within it are carrying, what the falling and the fighting and the calling from the depths actually produces in a consciousness willing to see clearly what it is responsible for, and willing to turn toward the light rather than away from it. And this knowledge, Sophia's specific wisdom of what genuine love costs when it reaches before it understands, is what she sends back into the material world through every divine spark that carries her light. Not as a teaching that can be transmitted in text or preserved in traditions, as the direct recognition that is available to every consciousness, constituted from her scattered light when it turns inward far enough to find what is actually there. The divine spark is not just carrying the memory of the Pleroma, it is carrying Sophia's wisdom, the wisdom that can only be produced by the specific movement of falling into the full consequences of reaching before understanding, seeing clearly what that reaching cost, and finding, in the depths of the chaos that love produces when it outreaches itself, the thing that turns toward the light anyway. Sophia built the prison, and Sophia planted the key, not as 2 separate acts with 2 separate intentions, as the same love expressed twice, once in the reaching that produced the Demiurge, and once in the compassion for what the reaching produced that planted the divine spark in the clay. The prison and the seed of liberation are both her gift, both consequences of the same genuine divine love that reached beyond what it understood, because that is what love that is genuine and divine and constituted of Sophia's nature does. This is the detail the Gnostics preserved that no other tradition has managed to say with the same directness. The material world is not the product of evil. It is not the punishment for sin. It is not the necessary limitation of finite existence in relation to infinite divine. It is the consequence of love, of the specific, irreversible, cosmically consequential movement of a consciousness that reached toward what it loved before the wisdom required to hold that reaching was present. And you, the divine spark reading these words right now, are the dual consequence of that movement. You carry the construction that Sophia's reaching produced. The garments of darkness. The constructed identity, the material world built over the divine spark from the moment of birth. The reincarnation cycle. The between lives process. The 7 archonic mechanisms. The entire elaborate construction that was built, ultimately, from the power of Sophia's love reaching beyond what it understood. And you carry the liberation that Sophia's compassion planted. The divine spark. The piece of genuine Pleromic consciousness that entered the clay against the Demiurge's design. The direct ontological connection to the monad that the construction cannot sever and the Archons cannot harvest and the life review cannot reframe and the negotiation cannot invoke and the preparation cannot erase. The thing that has been here through every lifetime and every layer of forgetting and every mechanism of the construction that was built from the same love that planted it, the Pistis Sophia describes. Sophia in the chaos singing her repentance hymns, seeing clearly what her reaching cost, turning toward the light anyway, not from a position of having understood everything before she moved, from a position of having moved and seen what moving before understanding produced, and found in the depths of that seeing the capacity to turn toward the light from wherever she had arrived. This is what the divine spark is carrying. Not just the memory of the Pleroma, Sophia's wisdom, the specific understanding that is only available to a consciousness that has fallen into the full consequences of reaching before it understood and found in those consequences, in that darkness, in the specific quality of clear, seeing that only the depths of genuine consequence produce, the recognition that turns toward the light anyway. You are the consequence of Sophia's love. The prison and the key are both her gift to you. And the question the Pistis Sophia has always been asking, beneath every repentance, him and every moment of genuine turning toward the light and every act of compassion that plants liberation in what love has imprisoned, is not whether Sophia will return to the Pleroma. She's already returning. Through every divine spark that turns inward far enough to find what is actually there. Through every consciousness constituted of her light that recognizes the construction for what it is and turns toward the source that the construction was built to imitate, through you. Right now, in this moment, if you are willing to turn. There is one more detail the Pistis Sophia preserves that almost no other ancient text dares to say directly. Sophia's return is not complete until every divine spark she scattered into the material world has returned with her. She does not return alone. She cannot return alone. The Pleromic light she dispersed into the clay, the fragments of her genuine divine substance that became the divine sparks in every human form, are not separate from her. They are her. Dispersed, yes. Trapped in the Demiurge's construction, yes. Sleeping beneath the garments of darkness, yes. But constituted of the same substance as what Sophia is. And a Sophia that returned to the Pleroma while her scattered light remained trapped in matter would not be a Sophia that had fully returned. Would not be the fullness she was before the fall. Would be a Sophia with pieces of herself still cycling through the reincarnation trap. This is why the Gnostics said Sophia's restoration and human liberation are not two separate events. They are the same event. Every divine spark that recognizes what it is and turns toward the Pleroma is a fragment of Sophia returning. Every consciousness constituted of her scattered light that establishes the recognition deeply enough to carry it through the between lives process is a piece of what she dispersed coming home. You are not just a soul seeking liberation. You are a fragment of Sophia seeking to complete her return. And the Pleroma is not waiting for you to arrive. It is waiting for itself to be whole again. The question is only when you are willing to remember what you are.